Man who put together the Lone Star 600, Mr. Brad Dixon. How are we doing tonight, Brad?
Oh, we're doing great. We're doing great.
Well, I tell you what, it is I have been watching video for the past 2 weeks of the Lone Star 600 race. I watched a bunch of the in-car from Andy Roller, who was on the show not too long ago. I've watched the video that you sent me just a little bit ago from the aerial view, which was really, really cool. You just don't understand how many cars are involved in this until you see it from the air like that. That aerial view was spectacular.
Yeah, we definitely are trying to do a few things different, myself along with Jack Barfield. We had this vision of the Enduro about 3 years ago, and one of the things we've seen is, there was just a lot of retired race cars in and around our area. You get on Racing Junk or any of these places, and you see a pretty well-built car that's just completely outdated for whatever reason. It's kind of like an old computer. You couldn't hardly give it away. Those are nice rollers, asphalt modified, asphalt cars, $1,000 for a complete roller. And myself, along with Jack, we were sitting around and we just said, we need to create a home for old retired race cars, a place where a guy can kind of take something, whether it's grassroots, but actually what we really were trying to focus on is an event where you can run a $5,000 or less race car and compete for $25,000. I've raced UMP modifieds. We've run late models, and, nothing wrong with that. But, when you're running a $50,000 race car for $2,000, we wanted to kind of turn it around and run a $2,000 to $5,000 cost of a race car in for $25,000. So we've become one of the higher paying dirt track events in the United States. We had an enormous draw. We had, I believe, over 16 different states that came to represent the Lone Star 600, all the way from, we had them from California to Iowa to Georgia, Florida. I think Jimmy Sharp was one of the guys out of Georgia. We had 6 or 7 out of Tennessee. So we were able to capture a market. And what Jack and I got excited about is the amount of interest and how this has exploded. To tell you, they've had a copy, I call it a copycat race, which is a compliment. We want people to run these Lone Star 600 rules packages like Joe's doing in Waco in February. We're going to go down there and support him at his event. He's taking the Lone Star 600 rules because it's a working set of Enduro rules. They had a race in Iowa with the rules earlier about a month before ours. I think Halloween they're having a race in Eunice, New Mexico with our rules. Tennessee, they're trying to do it at a track, and I'm in talks with them, just trying to help them. Jack and myself will help anybody try to get these deals going because we want to see this. We want to see Enduros make a comeback because the fans love them.
Well,
the fans absolutely love them.
Brad, the thing that gets me about this, and we talked about this earlier today, is the excitement that this generates. When we mentioned this on the show earlier, I always keep my Facebook page open during the show, and I get a lot of messages. I had 2 drivers right off the rip say, hey, we could tune up at the one in Texas in February to get ready for the one in Texas in October. So, you've got guys that are looking at using the one in February, the one Joe's putting up. They're using it as a tune-up to see what they're going to need to come run yours in October.
Absolutely. And the neat thing about what Joe is doing is an awesome tune-up event. And what separates my event a little bit, Joe's race, and that's why Jack and myself are going down there to support him. Big Race Promotions will be down there to give him a helping hand on anything he needs because he's a great guy, and I totally love what he's trying to do, especially it's in Texas for tune-up guys. But one thing that we we decided to do is, people said, wow, that's a 2-day show. That's a lot of laps. But what's really neat is when you go down to an enduro, especially paying what we do down here in October, if a guy comes all the way from your home state and he has a bad night on Friday night, he breaks the transmission. Well, he came all that way for nothing. He feels, well, heck, he could put another transmission in. The Texas hospitality down here is great. So, anybody that needed anything, everybody networks, just like when I started racing back in the 80s, the good old days, I call it, where you could go to anybody's trailer and borrow a part. That's the kind of feel you get down here at the Lone Star 600. But if you have a problem on Friday, you're still in the show for Saturday. We have a 1 entry fee. It's $150 for both days, and it includes your scores pit pass for both days. So the one thing that I always had a hard time with is on some of these larger shows is, I'd have a awesome race car, but boy, I got a bad draw, and it didn't matter how good my race car was. It just, I started in the back of this heat, worked my way up 5 spots, and I start in the back of this D main, and then I work my way up, and I make it into the C, but I start in the back of the C. But then they only take 2 out of the B to the A, and then I'm going home on the trailer because I finished 3rd, and I done put 150 laps of B's and heat races and C's and D's, and I go home empty. To whereas this deal, we're going to take 200 cars. If you get your entry in, you're qualified for the money. You just got to keep the nose clean and have a good time. And the amount of cars that we had returned from Friday to Saturday, everybody says, oh man, I bet not too many cars finished. It blew us away, how many cars returned. I think we only had a total of about 26 or 7. I had to look at the exact number, about 26 cars that did not return from Friday or Saturday. And some of those were the guys only just came for one day because, they had work commitments or whatnot. But as far as the success rate of people being able to get their cars fixed and come back, have some more fun on Saturday was just phenomenal. I mean, we had one guy, he changed his, he was cutting out his frame, and they redid the frame and everything Friday night. And it's like you hadn't seen that camaraderie. And that's what I feel is missing in this sport a lot of times, and I call it the big toter home syndrome. People get in their toter homes, and you can't even see who's across the way, and people hang out in their toters. But with our Lone Star 600, it's such an event. It's more than a race. It's an event. The camaraderie is just outstanding. People going around talking, and, hey, what state are you from? And, people see, we saw North Carolina, South Dakota. We saw all kinds of license plates on these trailers. And the neat thing is, we had one guy, he came all the way from Nebraska, and he was kind of one of my favorites because he came from Nebraska, and he came in like a 1978 Chevy van with an open trailer all the way from Nebraska. Had the best time of his life. He's ran both enduros. He's coming back to the 3rd one. But to see, he says, man, this is, I just do this one race a year, and I'm content. He doesn't have, deep pockets to where he can run every week. And he loves this enduro stuff. So it's really opened up an opportunity for guys that love to race, but just can't quite afford it. They have a home now. And we're really real happy for that we've created this race to where people can just fit right in without having a gigantic rules package. Safety is important to us. So, we make sure the cars are good and safe. That's always a key component. But other than that, the only thing we look under your hood is to make sure your fuel line is securely mounted, your battery cable's not trying to cut through any sharp metal or anything of that nature. But we don't care what you have under the hood. We do care that it's safe, but this is what guys actually are loving. You can get we have so many outdated rules. I call them old camel hump heads, from back in the Chevrolet days. These things are almost obsolete, but you come to our enduro and you're going to see all kinds of stuff that you're like, wow, that stuff's still going. The guy had it on the shelf, and he just slaps it together and comes out for a great time.
Now, Brad, I know that you guys had over 200 cars representing 16 or 17 states. What is the one thing, when you look back on this year's Enduro, what is the one thing that you were really surprised to see?
You want to know the thing I was surprised to see? Is there was not, and this is going to sound crazy, there was not one fight in the pits. There was not, out of 200 people there was not one fight in the pits. There was not one person going over to another person's pits, mouthing. There was none of that. When I say for both years, now, as I thought, this second year, you think, well, after our first year, we had great success. In fact, there was only 4 seconds on Saturday after 300 laps that separated first and second, Jeremy Wilson and Tommy Page. Tommy Page was the winner, but there was only 4 seconds separating them. We have a phenomenal scoring system that works out well. We're going to help Joe with that as far as, getting, because our scoring system, I know it sounds crazy, it's better than transponders. I was able to, our clock is linked into the actual camera system. So when Mike Nichols won out of Iowa, I had his scorecard with all 300 times. And I'll just use this as a reference. On lap 183, his scorer, his wife Anita, wrote down the time of 66:50. I type in 66:50 on the computer, and a still frame comes up. And guess whose car better be behind that clock? His car. I checked all 300 laps in a little less than 11 minutes. I could go through, and we just typed in the time each time, and we pulled all 300 still frames up. And if there would have been a still frame on lap 250, if his score wrote down the time, I punch in that time on the computer, and the car doesn't pop up on the computer in the background of the clock, he would have been disqualified. So it's, it's a fail. People say, wow, how do you score that with being so sure? Why don't you go to transponders? I run transponders, and they're great. But I have had it where they miss a lap here and there. When you have 200 cars pinging the wire for 300 laps, I would hate for some guy to really feel like he won, and then I say, hey, well, your deal only says 299 laps. Well, then we'd have to go back and manually do it the way we're doing it already. So we just do it that way right off the start. That way everybody's on point as far as their scorecards.
Well, do you think that by watching guys like Joe who have taken over and adapted your rules and are putting a race on at their location, do you think that may be an opportunity for you to look at ways to improve the Lone Star 600 in the future?
Well, yes, and not to, our deal is such a massive scale. It takes Jack and I a year to prepare for it. On our deal, it's well over $100,000 that goes into putting the event on. That's why, so as far as if, Joe has adopted some of the same things we do, I did something really neat this year, and I hope I can do it next year, but, Royal Purple has suites above the track, up top. They have these, VIP suites with an elevator. And this year I was able to go in the stands and get everybody that was in a wheelchair or if they had oxygen, and I put them up in the suites. And I hope I can do that again next year, And we let one of the things we've always done is, me and Jack call it the 5-5-5. 5 and under is free, over 55 is free, $5 general admission, veterans, military, police, or fire are all free. Because, it's those community people that help us out. So, we got some neat things going there. But we're always open, if Joe brings some neat ideas or we see at Joe's race, I know this sounds a little funny. Every year at the Lone Star 600, Jack and myself, I say we're on the wrong side of the pay window. So we're going to Lake